Oh, good morning. Nice to be here. Nice to see you guys. Have you ever had someone ask you a question that you didn't know the answer to?
All the time.
That's fun, isn't it? Well, we're supposed to have the answers, aren't we?
Yes.
A lot of people come into Unity looking for answers, and so if you're looking for answers to the right, you're in the wrong place. We deal in questions. And I remember when I was in ministerial school, one of the things that happens in the 2 years that you're there is about 4 times when you're called into a meeting with already ordained ministers, and they're checking you out to see if you're worthy of being ordained or not. And the way they do that is they ask you questions, and of course, all of our instructors are feeding us what they hope are the answers to those questions. And I was in there, this was about my 3rd time, and this young fellow, I don't know how he ever got to be ordained, but he said, I have a question, and I said, okay, and he said, who are you? I think that's what he asked me. It was either who are you, what are you, some question like that. And I thought about it for a minute, and I'm thinking, I know he wants an answer. But how do you answer a question like that? And I said, I really don't know. That's what I'm doing my whole life, is trying to find out who I am, what I am. That's an ongoing process. I said, surely there's not a pat answer for that. And he said, oh, I know an answer. And I said, well, I don't. And 40 years later, I still don't. That's a tough question, isn't it? So we came away from that time, him thinking I was an idiot, and me thinking he was a jerk. And let's face it, you're not supposed to go into these meetings and argue with these people, but I sometimes did. But they ordained me anyway. One of the fellows who was part of the committee said there was a bunch of old women on the committee, and they said, well, ordain him, he's cute. I don't know if that's true or not, but they did let me become one. So, but that's the whole thing. That's the question. Our life is about questions. It's about, expansion. It's about trying to understand more. And let's face it, some questions are just not necessary to be answered in a way that's concrete. This is not a school that we're going to trying to get a diploma or education or a PhD or any of those kind of things. There's a way of doing that. But when we get around to this whole thing about spiritual life, some of these questions are ongoing, it's expanding, and it's hard to answer, hard to get to that. Last time I was up here, I mentioned the fact that we were using a book called Co-Creating at Its Best. And the title for that came because the 2 participants that were doing this dialogue together, Dr. Wayne Dyer and Abraham, through Ms. Hicks. And she said in the very beginning how excited that she was to be doing this with Dr. Dyer, and that this was going to be co-creating at its best. And that kind of stuck with me through the whole thing. It's like, what is co-creating at its best? And I realize we see often, we talk about co-creating with God. With God, we're co-creating our life. Now, I know how we as human beings co-create. Marie and I are credited with founding this ministry. And we did in a way, but we each brought something to it. I mean, she brought the heart, and I brought the head, and it worked out pretty well. And, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore founded the Unity Movement, where they co-created, they co-founded it, and they're two different individuals. Charles was out front, Myrtle was sort of our back, just keeping everything moving along and helping people understand the truth. And so human co-creating, I get that. I understand that two people can come together and create something that neither of them can create alone. And so that all makes sense. But how do you deal with God? How do we co-create with God? What is my part and what is God's part, and what does God do for us? How does God get involved in the process of creating my life? And I think those are wonderful questions. When I was thinking about that whole thing about questions, and I recently discovered another author who I really like. His name is Father Richard Rohr, and this is what he wrote in a little book I got called the 8 Core Principles. Kind of reminds me of our 6, whatever.
Noble truth.
Yeah, yeah, we like lists, don't we? Yeah. But what struck me was the 6th principle, and I read that, and there it is. Life is about discovering the right questions more than about having the right answers. And I believe that to be a truth. So when something's puzzling us, something is giving us a difficult time, our life isn't working, it's because we haven't asked the right question. We think that all we have to do is come up with the right answer, and everything's going to be okay. If we do enough things right, our life will be perfect. Anybody have a problem with that? Yeah. And so maybe if we look at it a different way and we ask questions, that's my question is, when I co-create my life with God, what's my part and what's God's part? And I know I've had experience in creating it my way. I was 36 years old, and I was totally confused. I had been trying for 36 years to learn how to successfully drink alcohol. And I was doing miserably at it. If you don't believe me, ask Marie. She was there, she saw it, she knows what it was like. Okay. And so I went to these people that I thought had the answers. They were called Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to them, I said, okay, how do I learn how to drink successfully? And they said, just don't take the first drink. I thought, well, that's a stupid idea. I went for these people for answers, and I found out they were just as confused as I was. But they did allow me to stay with them, and it seemed to improve my life, and I tried it for a while, and it did, and then I decided to go and have a drink, and be unglued again. And finally I went back in, and I can remember going, it was early in September of 1966, and I went to this AA meeting, and a little fellow, he was little, he was old, Bill Joy was his name. He supposedly he had 20 years of sobriety, which I highly doubted. And he came up to me and he said, it's good to see you back. And he said, I'll ask you a question. I said, okay. And he said, my question is, do you remember the day when you went back to drinking? And I said, oh, sure. He took that first drink. And he said, did you ask God for a day of sobriety that day? And I said, Bill, let me tell you. This whole God stuff is okay for running the universe, but God is not, my concept of God was that you finished a movie with it. A movie is going on and everything's going to pot, and finally somebody stands up and says, I don't know if you're up there or not, but if you are, please help, and God helps and changes everything. And so he says, no, I'm not interested in your concept of God. I just want you to answer that question. Did you ask God for a day of sobriety? And I said, well, of course not. And he said, okay. He pulled out a notebook and he wrote my name there. He said, it's 437 times in a row. I've asked that question, always the same answer. Then he said something that really got my attention. He said, how much longer are you going to be stupid? It's a good thing he walked away. I'm on my third day of sobriety, recovering, and everything in my body is coming unglued, and I didn't need to be ridiculed. That's the kind of thinking you have when you're in the position I was at that time. I don't want to be ridiculed, but I'm at an AA meeting. So, went to bed that night, and I got up in the morning, and I'm in the bathroom, and I'm shaving, getting ready to go to work, and feeling pretty crappy, but into my head came this thought: God, grant me a day of sobriety, and nothing happened. I went to work. It was a horrible day at work, a lot of pressure, a lot of things going on. By 5 o'clock, I just had to get out there. I needed a drink so bad. I was just unbelievable. And so I started, there was a bar about a block away from where I worked. I was going to go to the bar. And I started that way. And all of a sudden, into my brain, my mind came this thought: you can't do that. You ask God for a day of sobriety. Wow. I didn't go to the bar. I went home. I drove home. And as I'm driving home, I thought, I will never do that again. I mean, somewhere along the line, I had this ridiculous idea come in that once I prayed with God, I had a contract. I had never thought anything like that before. That was the strangest thing I had ever heard, had ever thought. Next morning I got up, I was feeling a little bit better. I was in the bathroom shaving, and for some reason into my mind came this thought: God, grant me a day of sobriety. My second thought was, oh, God. What did I do that for? I did it again, But it became a pattern, and it really did work. And so when I asked the question, how does God get involved? How does it involve in my life? When I co-create my life, and that's how it happens. It's because God is mind, capital M-I-N-D, and we're mind. And so if God is going to interact with us, He's not necessarily going to come down and send the angels, bless us, and change our... No, He's going to give us new thoughts, new ideas, what are called divine ideas. In the Unity vernacular, that's what we call them. And they're good thoughts, pure thoughts, and they're things that allow us to have the kind of life that we want, because now we're thinking the way we want to think. Now there's ways of doing that. There's methods that we can use. But the core of it, the basis of it is to begin to think in a whole new way. And it isn't something that we just do. See, creation isn't getting somewhere, completing something. We go through school and we think, well, boy, we feel so glad when I'm out of here and I'm done with that. Well, that's a fallacy. We're never done. And Charles Fillmore said this: the order of creation is from the formless to the form, from the invisible to the visible. This goes on perpetually, and there's never a beginning or ending to the process. One of the other questions is, well, what is creation really all about? Didn't I open the Bible, and it says there that God created. Or, we listen to the scientists today, and the scientists are saying that there is this field of potentiality, and everything, that's all there is. And on a moment-to-moment basis, what we're doing individually is pulling out of that field the expression of our life. And nothing else exists. We all came from homes, so right now your homes don't exist because you're not there. That's true. Those rooms out there, the streets, they only come into existence when we're there to be aware of them. Now, I don't know if they've got it right or not, but it's a pretty powerful idea. It kind of catches our attention, doesn't it? So that my life is actually created by my awareness. Now, how do I want that life to be created? If I'm going to create it with God, then I want to be created moment to moment, minute to minute, with divine ideas, ideas of truth, ideas of value, ideas that count. And it's pretty hard for me to do that without being involved with the mind of God. And it's perpetual. It goes on. It brings things from nothing to reality. Charles Fillmore used to call it substance. That we grow everything exists in substance. We bring it into expression through our ideas, through our life, through our affirmations and our beliefs. Right? So I want God to be part of co-creating my life, my university. Don't you? I think that's a great way to go. Who's the model for that? Well, in my mind, one of the greatest models of ever was this guy, Jesus. And his statement is, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. In other words, he demonstrated time after time after time after time the fact that all that God was in him. And this was what he was doing. He was always outworking the activity of God. And how did he do that? Many times he did it by just looking at somebody and said, what has made you well? Your faith has made you well. He said, be whole. And then he'd say, thank you, Father, for hearing me. You see, it's like, he said, ask. Ask and you shall receive. We have a process. We learned this from our teacher, Jack Bowen. It used to be called the mastermind principle. And you could get together in a group and you'd share with each other the things in your life that you wanted to experience that you weren't experiencing now. And you go through the process of turning your life over to that and then saying thank you and then leaving and coming back later and reporting. We had a group like this out in California, a church. There was a couple who came. And they had a small construction business. Well, I say small, but it was big enough for them to develop $250,000 of debt to the IRS because they were a subcontractor and the contractors weren't paying, and so they had taken the money they had, and instead of sending it to the IRS, they were paying their employees, and so it got out of hand. And finally, the IRS said, we'd like to talk to you. You ever get something from the IRS and, well, we'd like to talk to you. So we had a mastermind meeting and they said, we just wanted it to go well. So they went to the meeting with the IRS. Now, how cheerfully would the average person go to see the IRS when you owe them $250,000? But we had this mastermind meeting and they went. They came back and they reported. They said it was kind of interesting. The guy at the IRS said, why haven't you paid? And they said, because our contractors aren't paying us. He said, give me a list of those names.
Wow.
I'll send them a letter. So now you're getting a letter from the IRS telling you better pay up. Or we might want to ask you some questions. You know what you'll do to avoid going to the IRS? You pay your bills. And that's what they did. But there was another catch on that. And I said to them, well, you have to be doing some good faith in this. So we want you to have making us payments right now, even though we know that the bonus is going to come in, which it did. And they said, how much? And they said, well, $10,000 a week sounds good. So they did. And they started paying $10,000 a week to the IRS to bring up their taxes, pay the back taxes. And within a couple of months, it was all paid off because these contractors paid. They sent the money in, and they were able to pay it, and they were debt-free. And what was interesting is now they had $10,000 a week they didn't know what to do with because they'd gotten into the habit of paying out that much money. So how does God respond? You see, it's really interesting the things that can happen. And so anytime that you want to, you can have one of these mastermind meetings. You can go and you can say, and remember what Jesus said, ask and it will be given. Okay? Now remember one thing. Jesus didn't say, ask, 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 ask. You know how annoying that is? Did you ever have a kid say, Mommy, please, can I have this? You see it all the time. You just want to swaddle them. And you ask, it's done. See, this is a sort of a test of faith. When Jesus says ask, he doesn't say, come back next week and ask again. Or if you ask 100 times, or if you say 7,000 affirmations, it'll make it true. No, the strongest affirmation and dial is when just do it once, because you don't need to do any more than that. Ask and it will be done. Either that or Jesus is wrong, and I don't want to go there. I hope you don't either. Well, there's one more thing I want to show you, because this is how.
No.
Did it work? All right. You need to know that this is wrong, because it says God is omnipresence, God is omniscience, and God is omnipresence. But it's exactly what I sent to Annette. And she went ahead and put it up this way. It should say the last one, because it doesn't say presence twice. It's supposed to say omnipotence, which means all-powerful. Okay. Can you count on God? Is God a part of your presence? Is God really who you are? Is God here now? Is God, and that's the question. That's the question I would ask. When you sit down and decide you want something in your life, and ask that question, is God a part of this? Is God creating my life with me? Is God creating it in all of its presence? See? In all of its wisdom, all of its omniscience, and with all of its power? And I can answer you with that and say, yes, it is. And so you can confidently then ask for what it is that you want to create your life in the way that it wants to be created. And that's all we want to do. We want to create a life that is great for ourselves and great for everybody to touch. And when we're not doing that, then what are we doing? I want to co-create my life with God, because it works so well. God seems to have an ability to get in my brain and fill it with ideas that work instead of ideas that are confusing. And that makes all the difference. So I encourage you today, co-create your life with God. I think you'll be glad that you do. God bless.